HPX LOTM, please call me Mr. Error. Author, Hoin_Kyoma. Chapter 466 to 479. The distances between the mystical items scattered around the astral world were all messed up. Loki could feel that each item was almost directly opposite to the other if he considered their positions in the real world. Yet in the astral world, they appeared to be just a few meters away from one another no matter what angle he looked at it all. In the first place, the symbol too felt special in its presence. The symbol of the peak of the Fool Pathway didn't just feel like a simple symbol carved out of spirituality. No, it felt more like a puzzle that the knocker of the Ravenclaw house would ask its students, as if to say that the picture was the question and Loki had to provide it with an answer. But with this visible and recognizable, it was what troubled Loki about what he was seeing. What do I do now? Loki tried to study the mystical items that had come together from all across the astral world and formed the Fool Pathway symbol and felt confused. He couldn't even reliably steal them. Since the distance in the astral world was so wonky, Loki's theft range didn't seem to cover the mystical items even though they were right in front of him. As such, nothing's happening. Loki could only feel that the symbol was waiting for some sort of key to open up and move on to the next stage. Loki had a guess as to what he had to do at this point, but he found himself hesitating for the first time in a while since he couldn't guarantee that his solution was correct without reading the runes on the items asking for the answer. Especially since revealing the answer was very risky for him to do so blatantly and openly. So Loki gave up. I should have planned this beforehand, but instead of doing it directly, I'll just pretend to perform a ritual. Loki quickly knelt down and set up a quick altar with 3 candles and lit them all up using his spirituality and prayed to the Error God. It wasn't even a few moments later when an elaborate gate opened up in front of him after he used his deepened influence over the Saphira Castle to respond to his prayer with the sequence 3 characteristic. Emerging out of the door into the astral world, Loki looked at the still waiting symbol of the Fool Pathway and simply guided the gray fog to rush in its direction. And something miraculous happened. Instead of staying away like before when he tried stealing the items from far away, Loki suddenly found that the items were much closer and could be wrapped in the gray fog. Loki extended his hand to steal the items once again before they were wrapped up by the gray fog flooding out of the Saphira Castle, but he failed still. Did I make these items? That was the only reasoning Loki could figure out for the items being able to ignore his will so easily. But that means I'm involved in all this somehow. But I don't feel any spiritual significance at all. Single quote. Before Loki could think much more, all the mystical items had been wrapped up in a thick cocoon of the Saphira Castle's gray fog, leaving almost no room for anything to interfere with them anymore. Loki tried controlling the gray fog that had made those cocoons but failed to do so. This shocked him only more, and so he quickly shook his head to keep calm as he brought out Tom's body and laid him on an altar specifically prepared to keep him unconscious. The altar was blessed by Salazar Slytherin himself. Even still, Loki didn't trust Tom, so Loki embedded the sequence 3 Mentor of Deceit characteristic into the altar to keep all thoughts of escaping away from Tom's mind. It included all other variations of the thought as well, like contacting Voldemort or trying to perform self-harm so that Loki's plans would fail, etc. It didn't work on checking Tom's mind. If it would have, Tom might have simply made a concealed compartment in his body of heart and mind in some twisted way. But Loki was one step ahead. The altar worked by measuring the deviation in Tom's fate. As soon as his fate deviated from being eternally bound to the altar, all his thoughts would be stolen and he would be forced back to sleep. With the altar and Tom set up, Loki brought out the last thing needed for the ritual to succeed. The potion that had been manufactured using the sequence 3 Blather or Beander characteristic and had to be dripped onto Tom's forehead for the rest of the month, counted from one full moon to the other, 1 lunar cycle. Then Loki finally left a vial of Walburga's blood at the altar since blood from a member of the Black family was also needed. Loki looked around the area for a while, performing several more rituals and setting up a multitude of mystical items in the area so that he could detect intrusions of any kind. Loki even made sure to leave a tricky trap that would destroy a worm of time as soon as anyone entered the area so that he would be notified of the intrusion as immediately as possible since he would feel a change in his mythical creature form. To anyone else, the entire setup would have seemed like an overkill. But to Loki, it all seemed very reasonable. Several high-level Beyonders were after Loki, or at least his alter personas, and he didn't want to take any risk. I'll be very mad if something goes wrong after all of this. Especially those mystical items wrapped in a cocoon of gray fog. They directly reveal the Saphira castle. Loki was only cool about letting them hang around in the area since the gray fog itself should have the effect of concealment. So Loki took a few deep breaths and made sure that everything was set up correctly before releasing a long sigh as he made his way back to the room of requirements. Loki sipped on his special tea to regain his energy and calm his mind as he took to turning his efforts towards his next task for the time being. I need to figure out where the damn Chaos Sea is. And so Loki started casting a variety of spells, studying each and every bit of runic circuitry in all of them to figure out how they were all connected to the Chaos Sea. He had the inklings of a method in his mind, but it wasn't very grounded in reality for now. As such, Loki kept searching for a spell that would meet his criteria. If possible, I could make use of a spell that had a rather long cast time so that I could hijack the intent of the spell with an intent that would hijack the Chaos Sea from the inside. I have no idea how I'll make sure the Chaos Sea is hijacked by my intent alone, but it's an idea, for now. Things would be so much easier if I had some way to connect directly to it. But I doubt the founders left behind any such convenient item. If they had, Dumbledore wouldn't have been doing such a silly dance trying to please me to learn the location of the Chaos Sea from me through Snape. Sigh, and after this I have to figure out how to wake Helga up too. What are these guys? Children. Couldn't they have simply set up alarms to wake up at the right time? Wait, now that I think about it, why didn't they do exactly just that? Loki thought as he looked at the two last remaining crystals in the room with a frown. Will I ever know? Firstly, I will return in about 2 weeks. Due to medical reasons I have been unable to contact anyone. Sorry for the scare, I know how annoying it is to get a story dropped while you're invested in it. But I will finish this, I promise. Finally, for Patreon members that haven't seen my post on Patreon. If you've subscribed to my Patreon, I've tried to refund you all for the months I was inactive. In case you've not received the refunds, check out the post I made about it so that we can figure out how to get you the payment. Loki looked at the students in front of him with a confused gaze as he remained hidden under illusions. Given that the all-great Madame Umbridge had stopped allowing students to practice magic, Loki's hope of studying magic undetected while other students were busy in the Dada class, where the most variety of spells were cast, went up in a poof of smoke. He didn't want to let her deviate from her original plans since he didn't want to alert either Fudge or godforsake Dumbledore himself, who had clearly carefully planned out Umbridge's fate. So now Loki had to make sure he kept his gaze hidden from the other more experienced and stronger professors as he studied the spells of all the students cast in their classes. Specifically in the Transfiguration class, the class where people used their spells the longest, where Loki had to make sure that his experiments went completely unnoticed by Professor McGonagall, who could easily detect someone using their spirituality in a matter of seconds. Loki's illusion skills only helped him to the extent of allowing him to hide his gaze and movements. It did nothing to help him hide his spiritual fluctuations to use his own spells or abilities to experiment with the magic that other people were casting. So hiding them from Professor McGonagall's gaze was something he could do willy-nilly, especially without the help of the gray fog. As such, with his little control over the thin layer of gray fog floating around him, Loki worked hard to keep his experiments hidden. But his results looked very unpromising as he had started to study all these spells. Not even other people's spells have any spirit threads attached to them. How then are they even recorded? Loki frowned, not knowing if what he was doing was wrong in some way or if there was some other method he was missing out on that was not allowing him to access the spirit threads. Did they use some concealment ability to hide them from normal view? Maybe they wanted to keep it hidden from the mystery prior pathway people and made it harder to detect it because of that. Loki went back to paying attention to the class studying as McGonagall taught them exactly how they could make elemental transfigurations. Not something as simple as turning water into ice or turning it into steam. No, McGonagall taught them all about how one could achieve transfiguration in a way that would give a solid object the properties of whatever element they chose. For example, what if you gave a solid object the properties of fire? Such that it started waving and flickering, licking the air like flicks of fire, all while making sure that it still retained its solid properties so that it could be picked up and held. What was this useful for? Well, normally not very much other than the fact that objects transfigured to hold elemental properties couldn't be uncharmed, to stop having them, making them semi-permanent unless they were untransfigured. But there was an important application, which was what the advanced classes taught next year to those who passed the OWLs this year. The application was simple: transfiguring your body to become intangible like air or fire would allow you to completely dodge the unforgivables without getting hit. Of course, not many could actually do this, but this was why it was done this year, since the OWLs were this year and students' grades would decide if they could take this class again or not. This was made painfully obvious when Loki spotted students around him struggling to even transfigure a small cube of iron that Professor McGonagall had given them each individually, by giving it properties of any element they chose. Loki had long since transfigured his cube to flicker around like a ball of fire and was currently playing with Hermione, who had transfigured her cube by giving it the properties of water. McGonagall passed by and gave them both 30 points for their display. Hermione showed a smile automatically when she was awarded points, but in reality she too was wondering about something different, just like Loki. How do I digest my potion as an astrologer sooner? Digesting it by simply looking at the stars each night is too slow. What do astrologers even do? Suddenly Hermione felt snuffed out that she'd skipped out on her divination classes in the 3rd year. You seem distracted, Loki asked as he lightly kicked Hermione's leg under the table. Hermione's eyes looked around in panic as she assumed she'd zoned out and that Professor McGonagall had asked her question and was waiting for a question before relaxing and looking at Loki with a frown. What? I just asked you why you were distracted. Sigh, it's nothing, I was just wondering about what'll happen to our teams this year. Loki's eyes widened and he too exhaled as he nodded. Maybe we'll be given our own teams to look after like Cedric and his team did for us last year. Hermione shook her head. But they too had 3 members, right? Yeah, but we're divination specialists. So perhaps the school will split us up into 2 teams that don't have any Beyonders capable of divination. Hermione frowned and after a bit of thought nodded. That seems realistic. Of course it is. I can't be wrong after all. Hermione rolled her eyes good-naturedly before asking Loki a question that was rather strange. Loki, do you think there's a way I could travel to the moon? Like, could a person apparate there? Hermione was looking at the other students' attempts at transfiguring their cubes and she missed the look of absolute horror that appeared on Loki's face. Is she corrupted? Loki instantly checked Hermione for signs of any corruption, making sure that not even a single oddity was visible in any of her bodies. Just as the silence was getting awkward, Hermione turned to Loki to see why he was taking so long to answer such a simple question. But Loki recovered and simply smiled as he continued the conversation calmly, as if he hadn't been spooked out of his mind a few seconds ago. I haven't really tried. But why the sudden interest? And why'd ya ask me? Hermione shook her head. Just asking. I asked since I remember seeing you teleporting away after. Daff. Well, you know what I mean. Loki thought for a few seconds and then realized what she was talking about and nodded as he remembered teleporting away for a few seconds to try out the Disc of Wishes to revive Daphne. I do know how to apparate, but not even I have thought about teleporting directly to the moon with its help. It is possible to teleport to any location on Earth as long as you know the place well enough to be able to imagine it well in your mind. So you can go to the moon too? Hermione asked again with a little bit of excitement. Loki immediately activated his spirit vision to look into her body of heart and mind. She wants to teleport around space to act as an astrologer. How does acting as an astronomer relate to astrology, girl? But I guess she's getting desperate to grow stronger. Traveling the cosmos at her level is a no-go though. But how can she actually act as an astrologer? Single quote. She could act more like Luna, looking at the moon and stars for guidance and sharing such guidance with her friends, though I think that might be a bit too much for her to pretend to do. I mean, she's the only person in the pathway currently. So changing the pathway to match her own personality would not change much, especially since she hasn't taken in any Beander characteristics just yet, so the only remnant will she needs to fight is that of the original creator, which isn't very strong right now. But to do such a thing she'd need authority over the entirety of the door pathway through its uniqueness or high-level Beander characteristic. Waste of time, such a thing isn't very likely or possible to achieve. But I should warn her against attempting to travel into the cosmos without becoming an angel at the very least. Hello, first chapter after coming back. Thank you for patiently waiting for me to recover. Kinda embarrassing to read this chapter now, it feels so bad. From the new chapters after, 20 more quality and length should both slowly increase. Upload schedule will be 1 chapter for a few days before switching back to 2 and maybe even 3 if I'm free. Also, feel free to give me any critiques or writing advice you feel might help me improve the quality of my writing and your experience imagining my story. Thank you once again for being patient with me and staying here to read whatever I'm writing. Loki suddenly looked embarrassed as he gave Hermione a wry smile. What happened? Hermione asked with some confusion since Loki was completely normal just a few seconds prior. I mean, Loki looked at Hermione and then shied away once again by sending her a slightly embarrassed smile. Hermione's frown deepened, but then her eyes suddenly widened. No way. You already? Loki nodded as his tone sank into a whisper so that McGonagall wouldn't come knocking on their table to dock their points. Don't tell this to anyone, okay? Promise? Loki asked, stretching his hand over the table. Hermione looked at it and placed her hand on it firmly. I promise I will never tell it to anyone else. Loki nodded and spoke in an ever softer tone, so low that Hermione had to lean in closer to hear him. I tried once, but the great sage stopped me. Hermione's eyes narrowed for a few seconds before her eyes widened in shock and absolute horror. Great sage. Like the great sage. Loki nodded. Yeah, I've only told this to Professor McGonagall before, but the great sage helps me on my path as a Beander, and he told me earlier that going to the moon wasn't a very good idea. I don't know why, since not even Professor McGonagall could tell me anything about it, but I think it's better I follow them. Hermione frowned in thought, but then a vague memory struck her. Didn't Mr. Moon tell us that the true goddess of his pathway asked Mr. Error for help in clearing her of corruption? Could it be this is why the great sage stopped Loki? You know something? Loki asked casually. Hermione quickly shook her head and spoke calmly. I'll try looking in the library to see if I can figure it out. I'll tell you if I find out more. Loki nodded and they fell silent after that for the rest of class. The week soon passed and it was finally the school's first Hogsmeade weekend. Loki moved to Professor McGonagall's office since she had sent him a private letter to tell him that he would be informed of his new teammates there and that he had to be early. Loki gathered there, and without counting Harry and Hermione, who were also in the same office, he spotted 5 new members. 2 of which he hadn't expected at all. Mr. Loki and Miss Granger, these are going to be your new teammates. You are being assigned as their team leader and you will look after them, McGonagall said, pointing at the 5 people on her side. Astoria was the first one to step forward and introduce herself. She seemed to be enjoying the look on Loki's face when he noticed she was there. I'm Astoria Greengrass, you can refer to me as Astoria. I'm of the monster pathway. I don't bite though. The redhead stepped forward after that. I'm Ginny Weasley. Glad to be under your tutelage. She won't reveal her pathway? Loki asked McGonagall with his eyes, and she simply shook her head. You can assume she is of a pathway that enhances her physical abilities. McGonagall continued out loud. Loki nodded, but his eyes instantly switched to spirit vision as he scanned Ginny Weasley, and if he hadn't immediately switched to his illusory mask, everyone would have seen exactly how Loki looked when he was shocked beyond belief. Did Tom do so much damage to her? I didn't even think that Dumbledore would let something like this happen. They never removed the excess Beander characteristics that were implanted into her back in her second year. She's been a Beander all this time. Sigh. I'll have to learn to deal with her. Loki then looked at Luna, but she only raised her hand and waved at Loki like she was greeting an old friend, and he didn't mind at all. Even though Professor McGonagall seemed a little offended, but before she could say anything, the last girl stepped up. I'm Susan Bones, the girl said, while looking a little unsure of herself as she looked at Loki. Loki didn't need to peek into her mind to understand what was going on in it, and so he spoke calmly after extending his hand to shake hers. It's a pleasure to meet you, madam. Susan blushed since Loki was by no means average looking, and so simply being greeted by him in such an intimate manner that followed noble traditions sent the freckled girl blushing. And to her fortune, Astoria interrupted. Where's my pleasure to meet you, madam? Astoria teased with her hand extended, mocking Loki as best as she could. Except Loki held her hand too. But before Astoria could blush, he spoke. I hope you're all right, Madame Malfoy. Everyone's eyes widened and Astoria quickly pulled her hand away from Loki's with a glare. Loki knew just how to push her buttons, and so he laughed lightly before Professor McGonagall chased away the strange atmosphere between everyone by clearing her throat with a soft ahem. Miss Granger, these two will be part of your new team, McGonagall said, pointing at Astoria, who looked a little dissatisfied to be separated from Loki and the other new person. Loki looked at Hermione, whose nose had clenched up in a frown of anger and annoyance, and then at Harry before finally looking at the last person in the room, Ron. Ron looked a little guilty and embarrassed. Ronald Weasley. I'm from the Spectator Pathway. He introduced himself to Loki. Loki was surprised to say the least, and so he blatantly looked into Ron's body of heart and mind to understand why Hermione looked so annoyed with his presence regardless of his position as a spectator. Oh my God. He seriously told that to her in the face. And then didn't even apologize. How rude. But for my own to keep hating him for so long. There seems to be something suspicious brewing in the teapot. Kya, should I expend a worm of time to parasitize some random item I can gift him and then spy on this teenage drama? Single quote. I'm sure Tori will appreciate the news about gossip. Here's the portkey planned for your schedule, McGonagall said, handing over a small broken magnifying glass to Loki, who simply stuffed it into his pocket. The students then left the office in silence under McGonagall's careful watch, which ended with her speaking out her well wishes for them out loud. Once they were a sufficient distance away from the castle and on the path to Hogsmeade's shrieking shack, Astoria broke the awkward silence between everyone. So, what's the deal with you two love birds? Astoria whispered with a sly smile as she nudged Hermione while eyeing Ron. Loki screamed in his mind, I knew it. I knew Astoria had a sharp nose. Hermione simply rolled her eyes and looked at Loki, asking him to get Astoria off her back, but Loki only smiled in return, which caused Hermione to feel betrayed as Astoria continued to gossip with her one-sidedly. Once they reached Shrieking Shack and out of view from everyone at Hogsmeade, Loki pulled out the magnifying glass that was already buzzing with energy. Hands on this thing, everyone, Loki said with a smile as everyone quickly placed one of their fingers to make sure they left the place for their fellow comrades as they gathered around it with Loki. Once Loki was satisfied that everyone would get transported properly, he simply allowed the portkey to work as it could. Everyone was forced to spin around as they were all sucked down into a single point before vanishing from the place along with the magnifying glass itself. It took a solid few seconds as everyone saw the world spin around them before things started coming into focus. Blimey. That was worse than any portkey I've ever used. Is it broke? Shut up, Ron, Hermione said without regard for his feelings or emotions before she walked out of the room as usual and moved to Ethan's room for their assignment. Loki patted Ron's back lightly and moved ahead with Hermione, opening the door for her as he spoke to everyone. This is where you'll take your missions each time you leave Hogwarts. Ethan is your handler, so you better respect him or he might just send you on a mission that no one's ever returned from ever before. Loki added in a scary whisper which sent a chill down everyone's spines. Luna was the only one who looked confused as she mumbled, Isn't that nice? Since it means that we will come back from every other mission. To say the least, the mood Loki had built up tanked in a moment. Hello. Thank you for reading. Have a nice time. Bye bye. Go to my Patar1 to read 20 advanced chapters for $3 if you miss this too much. Loki almost laughed at how clear-cut Luna's analysis of the situation was, and since he wanted to make sure that his juniors didn't go into their first mission depressed anyway, he leaned in to make the situation funnier. I mean, you aren't wrong, Luna. I did return alive from all my missions since I haven't angered Ethan. Really? Was it that easy? Ron asked softly. I mean, as long as you don't count the time when we fought a high-sequence demon where a saint was required to rescue us, the time when we were kidnapped by a high-sequence Beander to be used as hostages by him, for an evil ritual done to please an evil god which ended with us fighting Death Eaters, or the time we fought the Dark Lord, it was pretty easy. Loki shrugged casually, causing Ron to shiver. Grow up, Ron. Ginny said boldly as she elbowed Ron as Loki turned around and walked away into the room. He was obviously just joking, Ginny said, but then Harry interrupted. I don't know about the demon one, but the one about being taken hostage and the Voldemort thing was real. Harry said, causing Ginny and Astoria to freeze and look at him with surprise. Seriously? They asked with their eyes wide. Harry nodded while brushing his hair in embarrassment as he pulled Ron along with him and rushed into Ethan's office. The girls followed behind them. Once inside the room, Ethan's gaze scanned each student in his office, which felt a little overcrowded now that there were 8 people in it excluding him. Once he was satisfied with his scan, Ethan smiled. The smile of the mutilated man was enough to raise hairs all around the room among the newbies. Luna was the only one who simply smiled back, which Ethan promptly ignored for his own sanity. Your mission for today is simple. Oh, Loki's brows raised. He had never heard Ethan describe a mission as simple. His intuition rang alarms, so he paid close attention as Ethan's smile widened. Your job is to guard the various entrances in the Department of Mysteries. Among the newbies only Astoria and Ron even had any idea what they were. Well, even Luna, if you considered her knowledge about Fudge experimenting with combining rainbow unicorns and Death Eaters to reach the secret source of magic to be true. And so most of them were confused. Ethan tossed over the file to Hermione, who grabbed it out of the air and ushered the newbies over to the next room where she would discuss everyone's jobs with them just like Daphne would do when she was around. Loki casually followed behind everyone as he thought about why Laura had allowed students to guard something as important as the Department of Mysteries. Is it because there's a shortage of unspeakables for some reason? Or because I asked her to find a way for me to be able to experiment with time turners? If it was for me she would have informed me about it, unless she thinks I don't need to be informed about the opportunity. Or she hasn't informed me so that she wouldn't have to leave behind a trail of our connection regarding the matter if someone else were to investigate. So before moving into the other room, Loki turned to Ethan and asked him a question when everyone was out of earshot. The unspeakables are busy with something. Ethan looked at Loki and after a short sigh nodded, since he knew Loki was close to Laura. Something terrible has happened, or rather is about to. We received news that the acolytes are making a move. We don't know what their goal is yet, so we're spread out thin, trying to figure out what's happening. The Department of Mysteries is still guarded by actual unspeakables, but we're being sent as bait to see if the acolytes try and take advantage of the situation when they see much weaker Beyonders guarding the gates. Ethan nodded silently. Loki too nodded in understanding before he spoke. I'll keep an eye out for any strange things happening. Much appreciated, Ethan said, going back to his paperwork as Loki left him for the room everyone had gathered in. Hermione was already midway through explaining to everyone what the mission entailed. We'll be guarding 2 points for today. Both are gates to dangerous rooms that we are absolutely not allowed to open. Ignore any sounds from inside or calls for help, since they are likely to be made by the items inside in an attempt to trick you into escaping. Ron raised his hand. Items will attempt to trick us to escape. Hermione rolled her eyes with a sigh. Who turned you into a Beander? Unsure of what she was getting at, Ron answered truthfully, Headmaster Dumbledore. Hermione's eyes widened, but then they narrowed as she got even more annoyed. Did you sleep through his explanations? Hermione scolded, but before giving Ron a choice to respond, she chided him with her explanations. Okay, I won't waste much time, but the short version is that mystical items are usually made from the Bay remains of Beyonders. So sometimes these items take on the characteristics of the living, which is why they seem alive, but they really are not. Ron grew pale. Understood that? Hermione asked when Ron remained silent. Ron nodded, but when her gaze shifted away from him he leaned towards Harry and whispered, She's not serious, is she, Ari? 'Cause that sounds bloody lot like dark magic. Harry bit his tongue in an attempt to stop laughing at the fright of his friend who had clearly stumbled into being a Beander. He'd heard from Professor Dumbledore that Ron had wanted to become involved in the affairs of the Order of Phoenix, but since he wasn't a Beander he was rejected each time. That was when he finally caught Dumbledore at an awkward time when a meeting had just ended and just wouldn't leave him. According to Dumbledore, Ron had hugged his leg and wouldn't budge because both his friends were Beyonders and part of the Order of Phoenix's operations, and he felt left out. And so Dumbledore gave him the spectator potion. But when Dumbledore told Ron about cogitation, Ron fell asleep after performing it for the first time. Dumbledore had explained everything in that time, but since Ron was asleep he heard none of it. With no time to repeat his explanation again, Dumbledore was forced to let Harry take care of Ron, who thought it would be hilarious for him to embarrass himself for a while since he had argued with him for nearly the entirety of the first half of the last year because of jealousy. So Harry just enjoyed Ron's plight since he knew Ron just needed time to adapt to whatever was going on. Loki noticed it all but frowned when he noticed something new about Harry. Harry had good occlumency defenses. So good in fact that Loki found himself in disbelief for a few moments. Is it something better from last time? Did Dumbledore do it again, or is it Harry's own skill? Or the effects of some mystical item or spell? Loki didn't see any physical item on Harry's body, but he couldn't peer into his body of heart and mind to see if he had some kind of special item without risking tripping any of his runes, since he didn't know if the Mind Dragon had done some secretive work here. Tisk, if only I had the Mentor of Deceit characteristics. With no way to look into Harry's mind, Loki was forced to abandon his efforts as he focused on Hermione once again. So we will take the 2 spots as individual teams. We will switch spots every few couple of hours to follow the duty-shifting protocol the Unspeakables already follow. But remember, none of us must shift from our spots or even think about shifting as long as one of the Unspeakables doesn't come to inform us about it. This is marked as a very important rule, so make sure to follow it. Is that understood? Hermione asked, looking specifically at Ron. Ron just nodded diligently, even though he'd missed much of what she'd said in his one-sided discussion with Harry about dark magic. Hello. Late chapter today. Very sleepy. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. With everyone on the same page for now, Hermione nodded with all seriousness as she led everyone out of the room once again. Just before they left the office, however, Ethan spoke. Good luck. Without even looking at them. You too, Ron said on reflex before he continued to walk further, leaving Ethan having to control the end of his twitching lips, but he shook his head and continued working on his papers. Astoria, however, wasn't going to let this go. Seriously. You too. Ron appeared confused for a moment before his eyes widened as everyone heard him whisper, no way. How stupid am I? Everyone snickered before Loki calmly patted his shoulder as he walked ahead and moved side by side with Hermione. So, where are we going? Loki asked, grabbing the file Hermione had in her hands. The location is hidden. We need to use some sort of flow network by the looks of it to get to the entry point of the Department of Mysteries in the first place. So the fireplace in the Ministry of Magic then? No. We can't access the Department of Mysteries in such an easy manner. We need to go to the clearance office and get our Auror training passes from there, and then show the Aurors our training passes to sneak into a hidden cupboard that no one uses in the office. It holds a fireplace that will be our entry point, for today. There are a few steps after that too. Loki had questions, but by the time Hermione finished, they'd reached the clearance office, and Hermione started leading everyone in getting their passes. So Loki simply opened the file to check if the reason for such an elaborate was mentioned anywhere. It can't have been because of secrecy, right? Wouldn't there be several mystical items that could conceal the place better? Loki's gaze sped through the lines in the files as he noticed something peculiar. The flow network didn't require one to speak. Their destination is simply stepping in. It would take them wherever they needed to be taken to. Every step in the process after that was rather convoluted and confusing too. They had to do several random things after using the flow network, like scratching the belly of a gargoyle, filling an unlit lamp with multiple Lumos spells until it was so bright that it became hard to see, and even speaking to a painting and making sure to sneak past it, into a door, while it was busy talking. It was clear to Loki that someone had made it so on purpose, but he couldn't immediately see this vague purpose. Is it to make us not remember the steps? But nearly everyone here apart from Ron probably has pretty decent memory, so it can't have been that. A hazing ritual. Single quote. I doubt they would be allowed to do such a thing when the matter is as serious as guarding mystical items. Ethan did say though that we were just bait. Do all the unspeakables have different rituals like this then? So that whoever catches the bait can be caught depending on how they enter the department. That's not very far-fetched, but it still seems like I'm missing something important. Loki shifted his attention to the desk receptionist behind the counter and walked over to him after everyone else was done getting a pass. The man simply flicked his wand to cast a charm that caused the camera behind him to flash a bright light directly into Loki's sensitive eyes before the soft screech of a printer emitted from the camera as a small card popped out of its base like a Polaroid. "This is your pass. Sign here if you want it," the man said, pushing a book towards Loki while pointing at a pot of ink with a quill in it. Loki's spirituality quickly checked through the book to make sure it wasn't some cursed artifact, which surprised the receptionist, but since Loki signed his book, he didn't care to mention it. The rest of the process was just as Loki read in the files, causing them to have to enact obscure ceremonies like they were trying to please their overlords so that they would be granted passage into their secret territory. Ron was the most amused by it all. He nearly laughed when he saw Hermione pet a gargoyle while telling it, "Who's a good boy?" with a lot of excitement, even though her hands were trembling with fear. Loki, however, was most interested in the magic around him. Although none of the other students had noticed it, Loki almost immediately noticed all the various runes and wards laid out in front of everyone. He tinkered with the wards without letting anyone know about it as he carefully studied their purpose and focus. But none of them truly did anything. They were simple wards that only let up when the exact steps written in the file to unlock them were followed. They were easy to fool for anyone decently knowledgeable about ancient runes. Is it meant to keep the Aurors away? Loki pondered as he thought about the Auror office they had just passed on their way here, since becoming one wasn't very hard. Loki shrugged his shoulders and continued to move deeper and deeper into the Department of Mysteries. The deeper they moved though, Loki began noticing that the seals started to get a lot more complicated. They were still simple to him, but for someone not very well versed in the language of ancient runes, they meant practically nothing and seemed like hieroglyphics. It was as if the deeper they walked into the place, the more someone professional had worked on them. It was to a degree that Loki stopped being able to find errors by the end. Loki understood that the earlier runes were probably the works that emerged out of current known magical capabilities, while the flawless ones were from someone as ancient as magic itself. But that wasn't what surprised Loki the most. What did was what happened when they opened a rather lonesome door, waiting for them at the end of the corridor and stepped through. The room they had walked into was deathly cold with confines made out of polished dark glassy obsidian. There was no other door out of there, which Hermione didn't mind as she walked up to the center of the room and stood there waiting for something to happen. As soon as Loki followed the last of his group of students and arrived at the center, he instantly felt a strong sense of suppression from the room for a moment before it vanished and turned into an affable sense of familiarity and spiritual significance. However, things weren't as easy for the other students. They all felt suppressed. Ron started trembling before collapsing onto Harry. Those at Sequence 5 bore the pressure but had to clench their fists to force themselves to remain standing. Harry recognized what was happening instantly. Divinity. It was something he felt when he had first become a demigod himself and when he was near Voldemort during his advancement to an angel. But the most surprising for Loki was Hermione. Even though she was still a measly Sequence 7, Hermione grit her teeth and remained standing through sheer will. All of them looked at Hermione first since she hadn't warned them about anything like this happening, but when they saw that she was barely standing straight herself, they started to look around for something to help themselves out of this situation. Some looked for an exit, and others looked to see if this was some sort of a test. The few who looked towards the door they had just entered for an exit, however, suddenly panicked when they found that it had vanished. The place they'd entered the room from had turned into glassy obsidian stone and fully become a part of the wall. But they didn't have to panic much longer since a cubic box rose above from its flush state with the floor. It looked much like a telephone booth, just made out of obsidian, whose heavy door swung open gently. Out of it came a dashing young man who could be mistaken for a dark academia aficionado given his deep dark circles and singed hair. Loki met eyes with the boy and smiled. "Didn't expect to see you here, Dominic." Dominic's eyes narrowed with happiness before he wished him and everyone else there back. "Welcome to the Department of Mysteries." Before tagging on, Loki, at the end, a little softer, to ascertain their friendly bond. Dominic's charm immediately grabbed the attention of every girl in the room. But he ignored them and walked up to Loki, whose shoulder he grabbed and shook a little. "Seriously? You found your way into this place even before officially becoming a member." "Hee, I'm just that much better than you." "Oh please," Dominic said, rolling his eyes, "I'm 9 levels deeper than you are allowed to enter, so don't even think about bragging about it in front of me." "Really?" Loki asked with a smirk, "And did you come to the Unspeakables HQ when you were just in your 5th year too?" Dominic's smile twitched and Loki happily slapped away his hand from his shoulder before patting Dominic's shoulder himself like he were consoling him. "Feels nice to talk to Dominic again. I never was able to speak with him so openly in the Tarot Club." Dominic simply shook his head and looked back at the rest of the gremlins he was surrounded by. "Now I don't know each one of you, but given you're all his friends, I doubt you're any normal." "My name is Dominic Shacklebolt," Dominic said, pointing at Loki with a simple head nod, which caused everyone to smirk in amusement. "I am Loki's senior at Hogwarts by 6 years, meaning I was in year 7 when he was waddling around trying to figure out the castle and its mysterious pathways. I was also the head boy and am from Slytherin. So I hope we get along well and become friends rather than simple colleagues." Astoria looked at Dominic with shiny eyes, not because she admired him for his position as a head boy, but because Dominic knowing, baby, Loki would mean she could get some dirt on him. But not everyone was as happy as her. Ron, for example, almost cursed out loud, "Is he another git like Snape?" but managed to keep his voice a whisper. But everyone ignored him as Dominic continued after seeing everyone else nod. "The Unspeakables have decided that personnel are wasted guarding the gates of the various glorified storage rooms since they're all well balanced by the negative effects of the artifacts inside anyway. As such, we hope to improve the quality of graduates who will attempt to join us in the future by training them while they are in school." Dominic's words, although pointed in a way that reminded them that they weren't really members of Unspeakables, did lessen the burden on everyone's shoulders since they realized that they didn't have to do anything strange like what Loki had scared them about. As such, everyone sent a winning smirk Loki's way before paying attention to Dominic once again. "Are you familiar with the rules?" Everyone nodded, grateful that they'd listened to Hermione's speech from earlier, except Ron, who was confused. "What rules?" Dominic looked at Ron, and his eyes visibly went to his head for a second as he absorbed the fact that his hair was red, before he looked back down at him and spoke calmly. Time's of the essence, so I'll keep this short. All you have to do is not move from your spot regardless of what happens. If you need to relieve yourself, use Scourgify. If you see a dead person walking, let them keep walking. Your job is to see that the doors don't ever open. Neither will something go in while you're here, and neither will anything inside go out. Did you get that? Ron nodded, although unwilling when he heard Dominic talk so casually about dead people. He simply assumed that he was exaggerating. Good. For now, we'll all go along. But your posts are different. We'll drop you off one by one, and when it's your time to leave I will personally come there to sign you off. How will we know if it really is you, Mr. Shacklebolt? Hermione asked politely. Dominic smiled as he looked at Hermione. Something about her eager questioning made her feel familiar to him, but he moved past it quickly as he tossed a coin. Good question, Miss Granger. Hermione Granger. Miss Granger. Dominic nodded. The method is simple, Dominic continued while tossing a coin her way and then at Loki too. That coin will allow you to tell truth from lies. It'll always land on its heads for truth, while landing on tails for lies. Be careful not to tell lies while in the proximity of the coins though, your face will melt off if you do. Ron froze when he heard that as he looked around. Blimey. How is everyone else so bloody calm about this? Face melting off. That's clearly a dark magic item. Has everyone gone bonkers? Ron then looked at Harry, who he hoped would be his saving grace, but he too was looking at Dominic with a serious expression as if he understood the graveness of the situation on hand. Loki examined the coin and felt a little surprised. These are items blessed by the Sun Goddess. So melting your face off is essentially another way of saying burning it off. Well, it is what it is. I wonder if Luna will be able to bypass the effects since they're so weak. With everything set, each team followed Dominic behind its own team leader. But with no other door in the room, everyone expected Dominic to summon another obsidian phone booth box for them to all travel in, yet he simply walked towards a wall. And under the slightly surprised gazes of everyone else walked right through it, just like students did at the start of every term through the pillar at King's Cross Station platform 93/4. Everyone followed after Dominic, with Loki being the first to follow Dominic this time. It took until Loki vanished behind the wall for everyone else to snap out of their slight surprise as they all hurried to catch up with them. The corridor behind them was made out of the same black obsidian as the room was. It was empty of any trinkets or visible alchemical items, except Loki felt a deep sense of discomfort from the corridor they were in. We're being watched? Loki asked Dominic after moving closer to him, at which he simply raised his eyebrows. No one under a demigod should be able to sense that. Dominic replied, clearly intrigued, but Loki didn't tell him the truth. Instead, I didn't feel it directly. Purnell blessed me with a charm that allows me to figure out when I'm being followed or watched. Purnell. As in, shish, don't expose me. I won't if you get me an autograph. Dominic asked after a soft pause, causing Loki to suddenly realize something as he nearly screamed. I never got one. Oh my god. I could have sold it for tens of thousands of galleons. Dominic stifled his laughter before pulling out his wand. All right everyone, make sure you follow your team leaders at all times after this point. And team leads, make sure you hold onto the coin at all times and make sure you don't do anything stupid without consulting it first. Hermione nodded before Dominic tapped his wand lightly on the space in front of him. And almost all of a sudden everyone became stunned, even Loki. The view around them changed as if an illusion was suddenly lifted from their gaze. What was until recently a dark and dreary corridor made out of glassy obsidian was suddenly a steampunk pseudo-technological marvel. The gazes that Loki had perceived until recently were revealed to be hanging dolls, much like what Laura had pulled out on their first ever mission as part-time unspeakables. Each straw doll hung from the ceiling, its hollow buttony eyes lingering on them, which Loki guessed was because they were searching for an opportunity to die. And they had deemed Loki to be of the biggest threat to themselves. But that was the least of Loki's worries for now. No way, how did I get fooled by illusions? And how did Harry get fooled by them when he has the ability to see the truth? Those dolls above are corpse dolls. Mystical items that are a part of the unspeakables department as much as the department building itself. They are also your safety lives, since under any distressing or emergency situation they will do their best to kill themselves, making it convenient for you to discard them so that you can leave alive yourself. Are they gulp alive? Ron asked, stammering. Dominic looked at him and embodied a true Cheshire grin. We don't really know what they are, but the leading theory is that they are all souls of unspeakables that betray the ministry in hopes of selling an invaluable item and making it rich in the outer world. So make sure you don't, accidentally, take something from here. Gulp. Ron paled and nodded quickly. Dominic turned towards Hermione. Make sure all of your teammates stay in line, all right, Dominic warned, and Hermione nodded stiffly. To Loki, it seemed like she was almost about to salute Dominic if his heroic gaze stayed on her any longer. Dominic then pointed at a door beside them. Go through here. Walk straight ahead until you come across the next door. Stop there. That's where you have to wait for the next 4 hours. Your replacements will arrive there too. Hermione nodded and quickly parted with her team. Astoria gave Loki a reluctant glance, but he simply smiled in her direction as she gave up side and followed Hermione. To her credit, Hermione didn't directly follow Dominic's orders. Instead, she repeated them while holding the coin in her hand and flicked it into a toss. The coin landed flat on her palm and she revealed its outcome after checking it herself. It was heads. With her confirmation done, Hermione left with her team by moving behind the shiny door that Dominic had pointed at. Loki then followed Dominic along with Luna, Susan, and Ginny until they reached another door. He tried to remember the pathway back out, but his memory seemed to be faulting him in some way, since he could feel that everything he remembered was on the tip of his tongue but he couldn't quite formulate it. It was as if someone was tampering with his mind's connection to the specific memories he would need to get out of this place. As such, Loki wondered how Dominic was able to remember where to go, and so he activated his spirit vision. And what he saw did surprise him. Dominic, despite his fantastic performance, didn't know the direction either. He was simply following the guidance of what appeared to be an arrowhead hidden away in his palm. Loki could watch the arrow forcefully tilt in a particular direction, which Dominic took each time. Eventually, they reached a similar door to the one they had seen before when they stopped to drop off Hermione. Behind this door, Loki, Dominic said with a smile, causing Loki to smile too. Are you going to be the one that comes to inform us about the shift changing again? I should be if nothing goes wrong. But since I work closely with her, I don't exactly have a fixed schedule, and much of what I do depends on what emergencies she is called to fix. Loki nodded in understanding, and not wanting to keep his juniors waiting for any longer, he quickly flicked his coin into the air much like Hermione did. And just like with her, the result was heads. Good luck out there. Don't get too curious, and don't let anyone else get curious too, Dominic said without elaborating much before Loki slipped behind the door. Almost as soon as Loki stepped behind the door, he realized why Dominic hadn't followed them through. It was a trippy experience, to say the least. Loki almost immediately felt something infiltrate his mind. He knew he could keep it away very easily by simply stealing its probes, but he also understood that keeping it away would immediately result in being targeted by much larger guns, that he was sure were currently just hidden yet pointed meticulously at anyone who did so. The probe entered deeper into his mind, not scanning his memories or even looking at them in a passing glance. It felt more like a surgical robotic arm directed towards a single target, and in this case, the target was two things. Either Loki could allow the probe to stick to his knowledge about everything on this side of the door Dominic had left them at so that he could keep his sense of time, or lose his sense of time so that he could retain his knowledge about what was on this side of the door. It was a trippy experience, to say the least. Loki's eyes moved towards his three teammates and he spoke calmly. You can choose as you wish. Since we weren't informed about it, it is likely left to personal preference. All you need to remember is that you need to stay here for as long as I don't tell you that you can move around after tossing the coin to check if my orders are right." The three girls nodded quickly and made their choices. "Would you like to inform me about your choice?" Loki asked. Ginny went first. Should I still answer? Why have you been silent for so long?" "Well, never mind, I'm answering all right. I chose time, but by the way, your robes smell so nice. Did you ask the house elves to do something special to them? They look so fluffy too. Is it a spell? I would like to learn it if possible." Ginny spoke a lot and continued to speak to Loki until Susan suddenly interrupted. "Your red hair's pretty. I've heard so much about it from my aunt. She says that everyone in the ministry secretly admires your father's hair color. She even said that the Weasley family was made noble because of the color of their hair. Oh, also, are you all right? Are we all right? Loki looks concerned about us." "Oh. Stop it. No, I'm not against him being so concerned about us, but you know." And now the two of them were busy chattering about something Loki wanted to keep out of his head. "They talk a lot, don't they? I guess they've chosen time, I guess." Loki asked Luna, and when he looked at her, she looked clueless, even more than usual if that was possible. "Do you know what we are doing here? I remember Mr. Shacklelightning telling us that we would be following your orders. What are your orders? Do you want me to stop them from speaking?" Luna asked, her hand already on her wand. Loki deadpanned. "Seriously? Shacklelightning? Does that have anything to do with her memory being tampered? Why does it feel like she's just using this as a chance to abuse him? What did Dominic do to her for her to want to annoy him? Is Dominic secretly a villain?" Loki shook his head and made his choice too. He chose time. It wasn't because he was afraid of something or someone tampering with his memories, but because he wanted to try and experience what it might seem like to him in the future if he manipulated time or lost his sense of time. Since his pathway had an affinity for it, he just wanted to experience it given the chance. Also, maybe because he hoped the boring 4 hours that they would have to sit in front of a gate would pass because he lacked any sense of time to keep track of it. As soon as he made his choice, Loki immediately understood why having your sense of time stolen while keeping your memories intact was even an option. It was because human bodies were naturally wired to keep track of time. From his heartbeat to his breathing, everything was hardwired for it. And from the moment he had chosen that option, Loki's mind slipped into a buzz. There were several thoughts floating about in the same moment, if a moment was even a thing anymore. These thoughts weren't logical or illogical. Loki was simply feeling every conscious or unconscious thought in his body at once. From things like his own subconscious thoughts about the two girls' confusing conversation where neither side was speaking in tandem with the other yet it all making perfect sense, to things like his lungs constantly demanding his body to take in deep relaxed breaths to keep his brain fed with oxygen. Loki stopped being able to differentiate between the past, present and the future. To him it was all happening at once. If he had to describe it, according to him an apt description would be that his thoughts and actions were happening at the same time, almost to the extent that he could swear that if he stopped thinking he would die. With great difficulty, Loki turned to Luna and asked her a question. "How long have we been standing here, Luna?" Loki felt like Luna answered him before his question even ended. It wasn't that Loki had perceived the future, no, it was just that he couldn't perceive time, and so to him, Luna's answer felt like it had come from the future. "It hasn't even been a second." "Great, is it too late to change my choice now?" was just one of Loki's many thoughts. Loki trudged through the rest of the shift regretting his choice, but he never let it show outwardly. Instead, Loki made sure to spend the time studying the area around him. The steampunk nature had left him confused about certain things. For example, every few minutes or seconds, Loki didn't really know how long, certain gears on the walls shifted. Well, this on its own wouldn't have kept Loki's attention as much as it did since Loki wasn't very interested in mechanical items. He did study enough of it to make sure his alchemical puppets behaved as he wanted them to, but that was more of making magic bend things in ways he wanted to, and it wasn't something he was genuinely passionate about like he was about runes. The reason it grabbed Loki's attention was because for as long as Loki stayed there, the detection field spread around the area changed every time the gears turned. At first, Loki simply assumed that different runic circuits were carved into the gears, which changed accordingly when the gears spun around. Except no matter how hard Loki tried to observe any runes, he just couldn't. For a while, Loki wondered if the same entity that had trapped him and everyone else in an illusion before was responsible for hiding the runic circuits from his gaze. After all, no one would expose a system directly to their enemy, would they? This was what became a point of contention for as long as Loki stared at the gears. Why would the person expose the gears but not the system that caused the magic around them to change? Luna, why do you think someone would reveal the gears but not the magical mechanism that it changes? Is it pride? Loki felt like Luna didn't even take her time to stare at the gears to think up an answer, as if she was far more advanced than Loki. Luna looked at the gears and said something strange. I've always wondered why the Ravenclaw owl asks us about answers it already knows too. Perhaps it just needs to be reminded of things it has forgotten. Oh, an idea flickered to life in Loki's mind. Could you repeat that again, Luna? It just needs to be reminded of things it has forgotten. No. Before that, I've always wondered why the Ravenclaw owl asks us about answers it already knows. Yes, precisely. Loki nodded sagely. This is a puzzle. It must be one. The creator must have set it up for inquisitive people like us. But weren't we asked by Shacklelightning not to become curious? Loki frowned. True, what should we do then? A secret's safe only if no one knows about it, Luna said while looking at the two other girls who were so openly discussing everything about Hogwarts gossip, before turning to stare at the other side of the hallway where the carvings of legendary animals of the wizarding world were molded into short narratives. Loki looked around and when he found no one looking at him he looked back at the gears and activated his spirit vision. Huh. Loki was suddenly taken aback. The spirit threads, they're moving like wires, behind the walls. Someone's controlling them by controlling their fate. Full pathway. Before Loki could do anything else, however, he suddenly felt sluggish. Almost on reflex, Loki dragged his spirit body thread back to himself with a jerk that sent his head spinning. Dominic did say not to get curious. Why Luna? Before any other thought could arrive in Loki's mind, he simply jerked Luna back by her shoulder. Luna immediately grabbed Loki's hand as she rushed to hold it with both her hands for warmth. As her face came into view, Loki saw Luna's eyes tremble with fear and suffocation. It's all right. Dominic told us not to grow curious about anything around us. This is likely what he was talking about. Let's stay away. Luna nodded, greedily gulping water from the bottle Loki had conjured. As Luna calmed down, Loki's mind wandered. Has Myone's team encountered something dangerous already? Why was Astoria sent to her team while Ginny to ours? Wouldn't it have been more meaningful if Ginny was in Harry's team? Given how much she clearly likes him. Not having answers to such questions, Loki closed his eyes for a brief moment before opening them once again to find Dominic standing in front of him. He was standing a lot further, at the door, but Loki hadn't realized he'd walked back to the door while observing the spirit body threads of the gears. Time's up, Loki. Loki's brows raised as he pulled out his coin and performed a simple toss. Heads, you're real, Loki said with a little confusion since Dominic looked rather ridiculous in his current outfit. Dominic was wearing a hat with a pinwheel attached to its head. It spun enchantingly enough that Luna was curious about it, but given her most recent fright because of curiosity, she kept looking away. The hat's for helping avoid whatever's happening in here, Loki asked dryly, wondering why they hadn't just been given a hat too. Yes, and this is the only one of its kind. I see. With the question answered, Loki walked back with his team following him as he followed Dominic who was standing at the door. Once they all stepped outside they all simultaneously took a deep breath in. Luna was perfectly fine since she knew nothing about her memories but she did become stable enough to let go of Loki's hand. Yet, she occasionally trembled. Ginny and Susan suddenly realized just how much time they'd spent talking about absolutely nonsensical things with each other and blushed heavily, but that didn't last long when they realized that their throats were as dry as a desert and felt like grating sandpapers. Loki was the only one who seemed normal. But that was only because he was using illusions to look normal. Otherwise, he too was conjuring water to soothe his nerves and cool down his overheating brain. I didn't think about it much inside that room, but the full pathway. Marionettes. Do the unspeakables have a full pathway meander in their midst? No, that would be a much bigger news if it were true. So something else. But what? Some demonic item. Like my disc of wishes. Given how the miracle invoker is sequenced to a mere marionette, meander characteristic should indeed be much more common. But all the gears in there had their spirit body threads plucked away. Loki frowned as he reached a different conclusion. That wasn't the work of a mere marionettist. I'm sure the Sequence 5 marionettist can only control 3 maximum people at once. But the fool blasphemy card is with Helena. Loki put his thoughts on the matter aside for now as he broke his illusion and asked Dominic a simple question. Everything all right with the other team? Dominic laughed, which made Ginny feel strange for a second before her eyes widened. No way. Ron. Ginny practically gasped. Yes, your brother. He started crying. He had to be isolated after he started losing control from seeing spiders everywhere. Loki deadpanned. Spiders? Seriously? He's a meander and he's still afraid of spiders. Ginny blushed and kept her head down as Susan tried cheering her up, but her throat was still too sore to talk right now. As such, Luna was the only one left. Rooney Tooney has a nice ring to it. Everyone's eyes widened at the same time before they all brought their hands to their lips to keep their laughs quiet, some out of respect but others because their throats would hurt because of laughter. PPFFFFTTTTTT. They all snickered at the same time. Ginny, suddenly emboldened, made it her mission to tease Ron with his new name in the Gryffindor common room. Loki, who noticed this, only shook his head in a call for mercy for Ron. Poor guy, he just can't catch a break, can he? Tired and spent from all his time without any sense of time, Loki collapsed into the most comfortable bed in the world, which existed in the room of requirements. He stayed listless for a while before finally pushing himself up as he thought. There ain't no rest for the wicked. Getting back onto his feet, Loki grabbed the teacup that floated towards him. He walked up to his table, placed down the teacup and cracked his fingers. Let's figure out where the Chaos Sea is tonight. The damn thing is taking up too much of my time. But Loki's motivation waned after a few minutes when he realized that he truly absolutely had no clue where the damn thing was. Or rather, he had a clue, but he found himself getting a little scared of pursuing it. The Chaos Sea is connected to the sea of subconscious of every person around. So there's possibly a way for me to traverse through the sea of subconscious to stumble up on it. I could increase my chances by using the chatterbox since it is made up of the meander characteristics from the spectator pathway. But if it could be found that way, Dumbledore and Mr. True Creator would have figured out where it was by now. So it isn't possible to search for it that way. But could I search for it with the help of the Saphira Castle? But if it was possible to find it using another Sephiroth, why didn't she, Mother Goddess of Depravity, search for it since she owns the authority of the Brood Hive? Is it because the barrier is holding her off? Loki frowned. And then there's the fact that the Brood Hive is looking for Umbella, if she's here. Something about all this makes it seem like I'm missing a key point. Loki thought about it for a while and figured out what he was so confused about. If the Chaos Sea doesn't have an owner already, why isn't it reaching out to corrupt the world in some way? I doubt Salazar Slytherin's concealment would do much to restrict it from reaching out and corrupting those in its own pathway, wouldn't it? Unless it already has an owner. Loki frowned when he reached that conclusion. His eyes narrowed before they landed on the crystal in the center of the room. Have one of the remaining founders accommodate the Sephiroth. Loki's eyes widened as all the pieces fell into place like dominoes. They clearly had access to the Chaos Sea since they could set up such an elaborate system of magic. The Sun God is a woman. Helga Hufflepuff. Helga Hufflepuff is a great old one. Is she a pillar? God Almighty. Loki shivered involuntarily. No. The true creator's still around, so she should only be a half-great old one since the Hanged Man pathway is also of the God Almighty group. So I need to parasitize the Chaos Sea through her. But that would still mean that I've got to parasitize the Chaos Sea before I wake her up then. Since otherwise it will be less of a parasitism and more mutual cooperation. His mind couldn't comprehend what he'd just thought to himself. Since his parasitization was essentially a form of corruption, what he needed to do was parasitize a half-great old one. I'm not even a king of angels, for God's sake. Loki closed his eyes, sighed and opened them back up again as he walked to the crystal in front of him. So her spirit body thread should be connected to the Sephiroth in some way, right? Loki activated his spirit vision. The spirit body thread that connected to Helga's astral body frozen in the crystal was strong. Loki could feel that simply touching it would burn him up. A side effect of her being the Sun Pathway true god. I guess it makes sense that it wouldn't be as easy to parasitize or turn them into marionettes. How then do I set up my plan? Can I trick another god into doing it for me? Why would they listen to me? And it wouldn't be strange if they drag me into some scheme of their own. Loki thought about things for a few more seconds until his eyes dropped onto the begging bowl in front of him. I could give her revival item, and then set up some sort of trap in it to parasitize the Chaos Sea, within her. Loki knew his thought was just him making up tall explanations that really didn't have any grounds, at least for now. It would need a lot of research and figuring out to make sure that he could even attempt such a thing. At least I have a concrete direction now. There ain't no rest for the wicked. In another part of the castle, Hermione was currently hunched over her plans. It is more than likely that I'm going to have to develop my own shadow organization to create believers for Mr. Error, since I'm not going to be in charge of any large groups in the unspeakables anytime soon. This has its own advantages and problems though. While I could make a simple club to begin with, a club like the dueling club to help teach students Dada because Umbridge is pretty bad at it, but it begs the question about how I'll turn them into believers for Mr. Error. Why didn't Mr. World write something about how we could approach people regarding this? I doubt he'd ever need to talk to people regarding Mr. Error. If he wanted, he could simply use his divinity to coerce people to become Mr. Error's believers. Wait a minute, why doesn't he just do that then? Did Mr. Error not allow him to do so? Hermione suddenly felt a dissonance in between the image of Mr. Error she had in her mind until now and the one she'd discovered just now. Is Mr. Error a klutz? Hermione almost expected to be smote down from the heavens for thinking such a thought. But when nothing happened, her thoughts started to devolve into something fantastical. What if Mr. Error is actually good God but doesn't really know how to talk to people around him because he isn't from this era? Maybe that's why he wants us to help him gain believers. Because he's shy about talking to people. Hermione suddenly gained a ferocious light in her eyes. I'll make sure you have as many friends as possible, Mr. Error. In another part of magical Britain, in the Department of Mysteries office, Laura looked at Dominic with a frown before speaking. Nothing happened. No one tried taking advantage of the system. Dominic shook his head. No ma'am. The kids remained there throughout, but none of our alarms picked up anyone else interfering. I see, alright. Keep the schedule up and let those children guard those doors for the next few weeks. The divination department couldn't have been wrong. They did give us a large window of time after all. Yes ma'am. Dominic nodded but didn't leave. So with raised brows Laura asked him about it. Got something else to report to me? Well, ma'am, I was wondering if the divination department has been compromised. Oh. Laura leaned in closer. Seeing her pay attention, Dominic spoke calmly. The divinations have changed in style recently. What do you mean? The divinations from just a few months ago until recently were all precise and accurate to the dot. I remember being surprised when they even predicted that your presence would be necessary in the first case of the new interning students last year. But since the last few months, they've all become vague and unreliable. Perhaps someone has them under the imperious curse. Laura asked with a smile as she completed Dominic's claim. Dominic didn't understand why Laura was smiling so much but nodded either way. But Laura didn't say anything for a while as she shook her head with a sigh and explained clearly. Don't worry about that. You just don't know because you're new. Anyone in this field who's been here for longer than a decade knows what vague divinations truly mean. There's a meaning? Dominic asked, surprised. Laura nodded. In simple words, it stems from the fact that mortals aren't allowed to look directly at gods. Huh. Dominic was puzzled for a few seconds, but that was when his eyes widened. That means, yes. Laura nodded, her smile only growing wider. True gods are moving again. It is why the divination experts can't predict everything with certainty. High sequence beyonders closer to becoming true gods, or true gods themselves, are going to be moving soon. Dominic's mouth hung a little loose. Give them some credit, Laura said. Their vague predictions are also helpful enough in this scenario. Times are dangerous and this is the best we can achieve. It's the best a mere mortal can do. Now trot off, those papers you have to trudge through aren't going to sort themselves out. Yes ma'am. Dominic nodded, saluted and left Laura's office to walk back to his seat with the others. Laura meanwhile frowned. But even I don't know who exactly is in that strange divination department that we have. Sitting inside his prison cell, Gellert looked at the remains of what was once a towering mountain with a simple smile. How interesting. The mantis stalks the cicada unaware of the oriole behind. Was that the quote? How funny, for the blessed of the person who used it to be trapped in the same way. Grindelwald stroked his clean chin with a humorous smile. Slowly his smile turned more and more sinister. As if something glimmering in the distant future had become visible. Something that he was about to grab for himself. After your dear blessed it'll be you, amen, worry not. I'll make sure your blessed's death is as useful as yours for the world. Grindelwald's smile returned to the normal smile of an old man soon enough. It appeared as though he was a simple fool out for a morning walk to enjoy the setting sun. Dumbledore in his office looked at Snape. Any idea when the so-called trip will happen, Severus? Snape looked at Dumbledore and shook his head. Could you ask when it will take place? Dumbledore asked again. Snape stayed silent for a few seconds before opening his mouth. I shall do so in the next meeting. I haven't received the item that needs to be planted yet. Perhaps he is taking time to set things up to keep everyone involved as safe as possible. Dumbledore looked at Snape for a few seconds in silence too, as his brain ran several thoughts in tandem with each other before he spoke. I understand. And the gospel? Snape scowled but pulled out a book from underneath his robes and placed it onto the table softly. Dumbledore looked at the attractive comical color cover of the book and smiled. Would you look at that? It seems your lord knows the magic of love too. Severus frowned, not understanding what Dumbledore was talking about as he looked at the cover to see if there were any hidden meanings. The cover was simple. A man hidden in the clouds adjusted his monocle as he looked directly at those reading the book. Underneath him were two people, a man and a woman, locked in a fierce duel. Not understanding what it all meant, Severus simply assumed it was one of Dumbledore's quirks which he'd come to terms with recently after learning from the Tarot Club that Dumbledore's other name was Merlin. It wasn't very difficult for him to keep the thought away from the surface of his body of heart and mind using occlumency while distracting Dumbledore with other more interesting thoughts, but it did make him feel a little threatened since this would all only work as long as Dumbledore played along nicely. What if Dumbledore ever noticed that he knew about him being the real Merlin? Except Snape hadn't realized that keeping a thought away from the Angel of Imagination wasn't as easy. But Dumbledore had developed a simple misunderstanding. Having lived most of his new life being compared to Merlin in one way or another, Dumbledore simply assumed that Snape was doing the same. A lapse in judgment, but one that was a reasonable development when no one other than the Flammels, whom he trusted very much, should know about it. Snape hung around for a few seconds as Dumbledore read the titles of various chapters. He was keenly waiting for Dumbledore to gasp. For the first time in his life, Snape saw Dumbledore surprised by a fact. Dumbledore quickly looked up at Snape, and when he saw his double agent looking at him with a winning smirk, Dumbledore pointed at the chapter title and asked with surprise, "Is this true?" Dumbledore's finger was on the chapter title, "Adopting the Founders and Laying the Foundations for Magic." Snape's smirk simply widened before he quickly left the office with his cloak billowing. With Snape leaving, Dumbledore continued to read the Gospel, his eyes widening in surprise at each revelation. He is the oldest true God. I see. He even adopted and helped the Founders grow, and above all, helped them invent magic. Dumbledore looked around his headmaster's office, and then the prized instruments in it, like the sorting hat, after which he looked at the more secretive ones that had been passed through history from one headmaster to the other, like the quill of Alzuhud and the wall that hid Rhodes. Doesn't it technically mean Hogwarts is his property? Dumbledore thought with his brows furrowed. But if he invented magic, how does it work exactly? Dumbledore thought with a little fear. Is it like me? Does it mean he knows everything about us since we all use it? How did he invent occlumency then? Which god handles that? There's no one above me, is there? What about his sacrifice for humanity? Why isn't it mentioned anywhere else? Is this even true? Does it refer to the godless collapse? The fourth epoch. Did the death of the gods coincide with Mr. Error dying? Perhaps they perished in this war. To Dumbledore, this gospel was truly like a gospel, since it sent waves of revelations through his mind one after the other. It was as if he were reading about a legendary figure, much like how people read about him as Merlin today. It took him a few hours to calm down after he read the gospel for the first time. Not much of what he'd read had still been processed fully, but true to being a spectator, Dumbledore managed to control his emotions by imposing the virtual persona of a calmer character as he calmly read the book once again. As he did, he quickly spotted several factual errors with the stories quite easily. But knowing that it was not written for people who had as much mysticism knowledge as himself, since it was likely targeted towards the new Beyonders, he nodded in satisfaction, since the book did a good job in glorifying Mr. Error. All in all, the book seemed fantastic. Especially since Dumbledore gained keen insights into Mr. Error's habits. He doesn't care what happens to humans, but as long as those that he blessed care about them, he supports them as best as he can. An understandable trait if he truly is the oldest god that formed out of the original creator. He must be kind and loving. But if he is, why isn't there an organization dedicated to him? He must have one of them. At least to conveniently affect things in the world. Or does this only reinforce his neutral views on humanity? A being such as him, that has been present all through time, shouldn't see humans as much else other than creatures that have good social skills. But still, why is there no previous iteration of the Tarot Club Severus as a part of in history? Why didn't the author of this book attempt to revive Mr. Error sooner? Shouldn't it have been much easier to revive him when there was no opposition and the Hogwarts Founders could protect him? But leaving such thoughts aside, what fascinated Dumbledore the most was the secrets regarding magic. It seemed like Rowena Ravenclaw had an idea similar to his, to help stabilize the volatility of other true gods using magic. But how did she make magic? Why aren't all gods included in it? Why did the goddess of fortune exclude it from her realm of balance? Why was Mr. Error not included in it, even though they clearly think highly of him according to this book? Dumbledore for the first time in centuries was frustrated at the lack of complete information about mysticism in any book he'd read. Being a Beyander of the spectator pathway, Dumbledore's memories regarding the Founders were still very strong. Especially since they were the ones that had helped him grow when he was a new fresh spectator pathway Beyander. As such, several pieces of their cryptic speeches regarding the elusive character that they looked up to, one that had vanished into history, emerged in his mind. This secretive person was never publicly mentioned, and Dumbledore only caught any mention of it when either of the Founders spoke to each other in secret when the school was rather small, consisting of only about 30 to 50 students. Mr. Error was likely the person they referred to, which caused Dumbledore to frown, since He, and many other gods had assumed that the founders had abandoned Dumbledore in favor of someone secretive. In fact, that was how Dumbledore had met Grindelwald, since they were both searching for the secretive person that the founders referred to, but that was a story for another time. Dumbledore's eyes then fell on the spells section of the book. He could see how each spell was described vaguely, but his skill and experience had left him a little afraid about how they would affect the wizarding world. Someone had to come up with counter spells for these new spells, and they had to do it fast, or there would be absolute chaos everywhere. But if they used magic to maintain their sanity, where have they vanished to? Dumbledore pondered in silence, with none to listen to his thoughts or untangle the webs they had spindled into except for himself. Time passed by in weeks as Loki started spending most of his time trying to experiment with Helga Hufflepuff's spirit thread. There were several observations he made by doing so. But that wasn't all that happened within those few weeks. Along with experimenting carefully with Helga Hufflepuff's spirit thread, which could burn him if touched the wrong way, Loki was slowly letting his body get used to having his spirit body thread captured by whatever guarded the Department of Mysteries. Loki wasn't doing it to train himself or such, but because he wanted to develop a spell that did such a thing. Loki hoped that as long as he could isolate the runes that allowed whatever was on the other side of the door to manipulate the spirit body threads of everyone near it, he would be able to replicate those abilities with the help of the Grey Fog even before he became a Sequence 2 angel, which was when Klein got access to the neighboring pathways abilities. It would be a great help in advancing his powers since he couldn't directly steal someone's spirit body threads, yet. Loki assumed he would get the ability to manipulate fate directly when he became a Sequence 2 Trojan Horse of Destiny, but getting some rudimentary control wasn't wrong as long as it strengthened him. All the regular visits to the Department of Mysteries had allowed Loki to experiment with something else too. It had allowed him to experiment with forming an internal clock that would help him substitute for his lack of time inside the leading corridor. But this was easier said than done. The first instinct was to use the Sea of Subconscious to keep time, since that was something which connected all people, and finding an island sufficiently far away from his own, of a person outside the Department of Mysteries, and using its internal clock would do the trick, since the foolish guard, who could manipulate the spirit threads, clearly had a range. But Loki quickly realized that it was impossible to do such a thing. Simply because he couldn't go far enough from his own Sea of Subconscious. It was because whatever made people lose their sense of direction as they got closer to the Department of Mysteries worked to make sure that as long as you stepped a little away from your Sea of Subconscious, you'd never be able to return unless someone brought your body out again. The second plan was to use the Grey Fog or the Saphira Castle in some way. Perhaps using a worm of time left behind in the Saphira Castle by allowing it to parasitize a mystical clock could do the trick, and it would be simpler even. But that too was useless. Loki did get regular updates regarding what the time was every 15 minutes. But because he didn't already have a sense of time, all he understood was that all time seemingly passed away all at once. It was a paradox. It felt like an eternity, yet to his logical mind the duration seemed as short as a moment. It was confusing. The previous weeks had also been productive in terms of mystical research. But none of his problems had made any progress. He was still at the stage where he was banging his head against the wall to see what would stick and finally let him through. Irritated about his lack of progress, Loki collapsed into his comfortable bed as a wet towel dropped onto his face to cool it down. It felt comfortable. Helga's spirit body thread is nigh immutable as long as I manipulate it directly. I did develop several spells to avoid getting burnt though. It also helped me experiment with creating spells to control spirit body threads. Given that my spells can create ripples in her spirit body threads before all my spirituality is burnt away, I can guarantee that any simple Beander shouldn't be able to stop themselves from becoming my marionettes. But that's not enough, is it? And then there's the project that I haven't even started on. Sending Dumbledore to the Forgotten Land of Gods. Snape has had the same thought on his mind the last 2 Tarot Club meetings. He's wondering when I'll give him the item he needs to plant on Bellatrix. To send Dumbledore to the forgotten land of gods. Rowena did leave behind mentions of it in the books she's written. They are also mentioned in Salazar's books since he conducted several experiments there, but neither of them had written down its location. Just that Mr. Error helped them get to and from it. And then there's the Chaos Sea that I need for my own advancement. Loki stared at the ceiling. How nice it would be if this room would become the Chaos Sea. Loki gave himself a wry smile as the lights dimmed a little when he said that. Don't worry, you don't need to be the Chaos Sea. You're crazy helpful in your own way. I wouldn't ask for a better one under any circumstances. Loki assured the room while petting the bed. Though I do wonder, you read a person's mind to work right. So your principles should be similar to the way magic works. Perhaps I can compare you with how magic works and figure out if there are some common errors in both the systems. So that I can hijack magic from the outside. As Loki continued speaking, his eyes widened. How have I never thought of doing that? Almost immediately Loki looked at the room of requirements with a sharp gaze that anyone would swear caused the entirety of Hogwarts to lightly tremble. I have a new order for you. Strip. With a new aim in mind, Loki rushed to study the runes of the room even though the room itself looked like it was being forced to cooperate. Loki promised it that he would compensate it appropriately by giving it some much-needed modifications like giving it the ability to act more freely and kick out people it didn't like. Loki didn't understand why the room wanted such an ability but he shrugged nonetheless and accepted the deal since it was a bargain. Perhaps it wants to prevent people like Voldemort coming in here. But he pushed the thought aside since he was way more interested in seeing the runes carved into the room. Something that had been hidden from him for long enough. But he also had another thought at the same time. Now that I think about it, I should also examine how the cards of blasphemy were made. Rowena made them too and so her style should be similar. It might help me somewhere. With his thoughts cleared after that, Loki walked to the new wall that had appeared at the far end of the room. The wall had a small shelf built into it and once Loki reached the handle he paused. Rowena won't smite me because of this, right? Well, I doubt she's even looking at me right now. She's probably more worried that I haven't given Helena a response yet. The ritual with Tom should be close to completion too. Sigh, how do I have so many things on my hands? Pushing away the distractions, Loki opened the shelf door, swinging it after twisting its handle. The door opened without a sound, Loki noticed. Assuming that several charms had been cast on it to automatically take care of this important place in the room. The shelf itself was mostly empty. It contained a note, likely from Rowena herself. But it wasn't a note addressed to anyone else, it was a TODO note for herself. Did Rowena have to go to sleep while she was making this or something? Loki mumbled, mostly asking himself. Loki quickly checked the note. Remember to check if the connection between the Hogwarts wards and the Chaos Sea can be optimized. Loki's lips automatically split into a wide smile. So it does work like I thought it did. And it seems like an error is already built into it for me to exploit. How wonderful and interesting. Hermione sat down in the Hog's Head Inn, waiting for people to show up. She had bought the bar, temporarily, to conduct her secret meeting so that the owner, Aberforth, wouldn't interfere with what she wanted to do. It hadn't taken much since the Three Broomsticks was the popular choice. But not a single person had shown up until now to justify her parting with so much of her money, apart from her friends, Harry, Ron, who she was still angry with, and Loki. While Harry and Ron were normal and simply sipping on butterbeer, Loki was being strange, continuously casting a spell with his wand pointed at Hermione. Hermione felt absolutely no difference from his spell. Though maybe the nervousness she was feeling in her stomach did make her slightly suspicious that maybe Loki was trying to give her a stomach ache to distract her for some reason. In actuality, Loki was trying to improve his skills in casting the spirit thread control spell. It wasn't the simple one he'd made when he was experimenting on Helga, but this was a new spell that controlled the spirit body thread without taking full control of the person's body. It was more a puppeteering spell rather than a marionette spell. While it didn't seem to serve any direct benefits for Loki, He was trying it out because it was still challenging for him to control the spirit body threads. And Loki didn't think leaving behind a trail of dead bodies wasn't exactly a nice way to learn a new spell. He had to keep his soul pure after all. Ting, ling. The bell on the door jingled and in walked the first batch of people who Hermione had invited. It was their colleagues at the ministry, Cedric, Zacharias, Diego, Luna, Ginny, Astoria, and Susan. They had just returned along with Hermione, Ron, Loki and Harry from the Department of Mysteries, but they'd just gone back to the castle to freshen themselves up. Hermione quickly stood up to greet everyone who'd come. "Thank you for coming, guys, but we'll have to wait a little for the others to show up, is that alright?" Cedric simply nodded. "Don't worry about it. We're free right now anyway." His sidekicks nodded and soon found themselves a spot beside Loki, trying to see if they could learn more from what he was currently casting on Hermione. "What's up with you?" Cedric asked as he sat down beside Loki. "New spell again. How do you even come up with so many new things? Even though I've read so many books as a reader, I hardly have any creative ideas." Loki frowned, finding it difficult to explain his spell to someone who didn't know about spirit body threads. "I'm trying to make a spell to control someone without their knowledge." An uncomfortable silence filled the bar. Even Hermione herself was looking at Loki wide-eyed. "Huh, what's up you guys? Why are you looking at me like I'm doing something wrong?" Ron whispered. "Gods. He's using dark magic, like the other blacks." Seeing no one answer, Loki looked at Astoria. Astoria gulped a little before explaining, "Well, it sounds an awful lot like the Imperious Curse, doesn't it?" Loki's eyes widened. "Oh my god, how did I not think of that? I'm so stupid. Of course, someone's done such a thing before. That saves me a ton of time with research." The awkward silence extended, causing Loki to frown again. "What I'm making isn't like the Imperious Curse. You can break it if you don't want to be controlled. It's a puppeteering spell," he clarified. There was a collective sigh of relief around the room, and everyone wanted to learn how it was different from a simple Confundus charm. But by then the doorbell rang again. Ting, ling. This time it was a large group of students. It seemed like everyone had enjoyed their Hogsmeade holiday before coming to attend Hermione's party, all at once. It saved them from having to wait any longer though, so no one brought it up as Hermione quickly stood up and helped everyone find a seat for themselves. Once they were all settled in, she spoke with a calm and serene gaze. "Thank you for taking your time to attend this short gathering." Hermione started as everyone nodded politely when she made eye contact with them. "Time is running out and I don't want to bore all of you with speeches, so let's get this over with quickly," Hermione said, and another round of nods spread through the room, allowing her to continue speaking. "We all know how poor Professor Umbridge is at teaching us. And some might know that she is worse than Flinch." The people who understood all clenched their fists as they were reminded of the pain, especially since they couldn't speak about it for some reason, which they did not understand. While the others simply giggled at what Hermione had disguised as a joke. There was a strong sentiment of wanting to earn some sweet revenge against Umbridge among the students who were punished by her. But Hermione didn't get to that. Instead she spoke calmly. "I was hoping, since Professor Umbridge hasn't been very good at teaching us our syllabus, that we would come together as a class and teach ourselves that way. Can I get a show of hands about those that agree?" Almost all hands went up, but a few stayed down since they had no interest in using their little free time to spend learning something that wouldn't even help them in the future. They were rather career-oriented people and hoped to secure a desk job and weren't expecting to do anything adventurous like Aurors. Hermione smiled at them and spoke softly, "I understand your choice. But I promise that this will help you in just dada. Imagine being able to ask your friends for help in all the various subjects. Perhaps some principles of manipulating your spiritual energy will also help you in the other subjects like charms and transfiguration." This did get the numbers up, but not by very much. As such, Hermione politely asked them to leave since they would just be wasting their time here. They agreed and simply walked out of the bar, and as most of them didn't have any friends in this circle and had just come out of curiosity, they didn't even take anyone with them. That was when Hermione pulled out a contract. The Beyonders in the room all narrowed their eyes immediately when they realized it was a notarized contract from someone very high up in the sun pathway, since the contract was radiating a sense of suppression. Loki had wanted to study the contract when he'd noticed Hermione carrying it around with herself everywhere, and he could have done it by simply stealing it, but Loki doubted he could learn anything too hidden about it that he couldn't just learn from Helga's spirit body thread. For the people remaining here, I would like for you to sign this contract in case you want to hear about the club we will be forming from hereafter. The Beyonders all secretly looked at each other, even Cedric was slightly tense. But when his eyes lay on Loki, who was yawning lazily in the center of the room, he relaxed slightly. If Loki was going to sign the contract, it was probably worth it, Cedric assumed, before nodding to his friends who nodded to their friends and so on. Hermione wondered if some kind of subconscious disease about nodding had secretly spread around the group. A few more students left the bar, not sure that they would want to sign a contract that Hermione was being so dodgy about, when it was all about a simple club to learn from each other. But the others that were slightly clever chose to stay, since the more intelligent students around them had all stayed, since Beyonders were often better at controlling their spirituality and hence better mages. What none saw, however, was how Hermione cleverly hid her wand movements in her robes as each student left. She was using the steal spell to steal their memories regarding the contract. Loki's brows raised when he noticed, but he said nothing, understanding that Hermione was doing all this so that she could lay the foundations for keeping Mr. Error a secret and not let his information leak to the authorities. Since he'd figured out that Hermione was going to use this group to spread around Mr. Error's gospel. I see, so a part of the spirituality in the contract breaks off and enters you. Like before. Still don't know who made it though. Why is there no Sun Pathway noble family if Helga's alive? Loki noticed as he signed his name on the contract. And so, once everyone who had to leave had left, and those that wanted to stay signed the contract, Hermione smiled at them. Why don't we get this started? I know you've all waited for this long enough. Information beyond this point must stay a secret. Not just because it is vital to what we will be doing, but also because of the contract. If any of us become a leak, everyone else in the group that has signed the contract will know. So make sure you don't if you don't want to be kicked out of our circle. Everyone shivered a little, but Hermione hadn't stopped. She'd only paused to let them digest the first point, after which she continued. Also, if any of you betray us, you'll lose your memories of all the time you've spent with us. Everyone's eyes widened. Loki was still yawning though, since he hadn't caught up on enough sleep as he was studying the Room of Requirements runes last night. Hermione's smile started to look dangerous to everyone else, which caused them to frown since she'd caused them to be trapped in something rather dangerous. But Loki spoke through his yawn. If you're afraid, just walk away right now. Ya WWNNNN, you won't lose much of anything. Ya WWNNNN, she didn't tell you that cause a notarized contract is pretty expensive, and she probably didn't want to have to renotarize the contract after she spotted this loophole. Everyone deadpanned and they all saw Hermione blush before she glared at Loki, who was already about to fall asleep on the table in front of him. But it did its work. The tone was jovial once again and no one had left, yet. When the atmosphere turned normal once again, Hermione spoke up. I'm sure most if not all of you know that the Ministry has been trying to seal up any information regarding you know who. There were short gasps, but Hermione continued regardless. I want you to know that through some sources that I cannot currently disclose because of certain reasons, I would like to tell you that he has not just revived, but is gathering a force to shake. And who says that it's true? A random student Loki didn't even recognize spoke up, causing Hermione to stop and look at him. Harry's seen it, so it's all word of mouth. Who says he's not lying to make this all up? The boy asked again, and while those that worked in the unspeakables all wanted to punch the boy, they held themselves back when Loki stood up. But something was wrong. Why is Loki looking at the wall with such a shocked expression on his face? Everyone was about to question Loki, but suddenly another person walked in through the wall that Loki was looking at. The person was built like a kind boy, about their age, but he had a certain intoxicating charm around him. Loki and Harry recognized him immediately, Tom Riddle. Nearly all those who could used spirit vision to ascertain if they were looking at some sort of illusion, used it to understand what had just happened, perhaps a ghost had floated in. A poltergeist. But to their shock, Tom looked completely normal in their view. But in the time everyone tried to figure out how the boy had walked through the wall as if it didn't exist, the boy spoke calmly. "Why are you here?" The Tom asked politely. "What? Are you going to toss me out? 'Cause if you do, my memories won't be wiped, will they? Since I never left voluntarily. I doubt she's taken that into account," the boy stated with a sneer. Everyone else's eyes shimmered at the information about this new loophole in the contract. Tom, however, smiled. "I haven't ever seen you before, but seeing you now, you're pretty clever. Or should I say foolish? You don't live up to the hype at all." "Foolish? Why? Do you think you can kill me so easily?" the boy asked with his sneer widening. Tom only smiled softly. "No. Not yet. Not when everyone's here. Especially when I barely noticed it given my skill." "Oh." The boy looked surprised for a second. "I was caught." "Clearly you were, or do you want to be a child and pretend that you never lost the game by flipping the table just like one?" Tom teased. Although none of the other people could understand what Tom meant by flipping the table, they did feel a slight shiver run down their spine because of the way he said it. They didn't like it one bit. "He's not going to kill us, is he?" Everyone wondered. Hermione had her hand on her wand, her spirituality already primed and ready to fire. Cedric and Co all had their Beander abilities ready. Even the other students who had worked as interning unspeakables had their abilities ready. Under their intuition, both the boys were starting to feel scary. Students even cleared a small circle around them because of it, adjusting themselves in the small area inside the inn. The staring contest between Tom and the boy continued for a few more seconds of silence until Tom spoke. "So, are you going to try and control my spirit body threads? But I should admit, your skill with manipulating the sea of subconscious of all these kids, so effortlessly, even though it's just a replication, it's rather clean. I am tempted, but I have this feeling that it'll be bad to control your spirit body threads regardless of my skill, especially when this skill didn't get me past your eyes," the boy said, his smile deepening as his tone chilled and turned emotionless. Tom smiled and raised his wand and said, "Well, it's time for you to leave now." There was a tense environment hanging in the entirety of the bar. Tensions were so high that almost everyone had their nerves drawn tight. Harry was almost ready to use all his physical force to snap the backs of whoever attacked first. And with Tom raising his wand, everyone looked at him with focus. Except Tom lowered his wand slowly without even using a spell, leaving everyone confused. "Tisk. The old fool didn't even leave me a goodbye," Tom said with a soft laugh as he shook his head in disappointment. "Huh." Everyone looked at Tom with confusion until Neville in the audience pointed out the obvious. "He's gone." Everyone's eyes switched towards the boy that was just arguing with Hermione and then had an impromptu fight with Tom. The boy was truly gone. He wasn't visible in anyone's spirit vision and neither was he available in anyone's normal sight. The boy had truly vanished. Except they heard Neville speak again. "Even he's gone." Everyone looked back at Tom's position and he was gone too. It left them all stunned and confused and quite possibly bamboozled. Loki, however, realized something else. He realized that Luna had already seen through it all and had understood the truth of the matter. So he quickly made eye contact with her and smiled. Luna simply shrugged her shoulders and went back to staring at the beetle on her finger. "You aren't supposed to be here. I guess I can keep you in my antivivarium." The beetle looked like it had received a sudden shock, but before it could do much else, Luna tapped her wand on it and caused it to freeze in place. After which she stuffed it into a shell in her oceanic necklace. But everyone else wasn't as chilled out as Luna was. They were all looking at each other with wide eyes before all looking at Hermione, who was just as clueless about the situation. Harry interrupted. "That was a younger you-know-who. He's a coalition of you-know-who's memories from school. I've met him twice before, once when he opened the Chamber of Secrets and once more last year when he declared he was going to fight against the current you-know-who. A stunned silence gripped the entire atmosphere. This has to be a joke, right? Someone whispered with worry, but there was no response from anyone. It was clear that this wasn't an act that Hermione had set up. Are you serious? No one knows who that was. The Beyonders could verify that the people they'd seen were real, so they didn't share the opinion lightly, afraid of making a mistake. They knew whoever they had just seen was as real as people could get. Yet their silence turned the atmosphere dreary since they were supposed to be intelligent. Cedric and company looked at Loki, but he wasn't as calm as before. And if one looked carefully, they could see that his hands were trembling a little, spooking them a little. Which left everyone else stumped about what to do. Well, apart from Luna. The situation was about to turn sour, but Hermione didn't let the opportunity slip by. Instead, she spoke boldly. As you've seen, there are secrets in our world that even we don't know about, regardless of where you come from. And these secrets are important enough that we need to learn them to be able to protect ourselves against them. I hope everyone can agree that we need to learn how to defend ourselves against such threats. So that we won't be so vulnerable anymore. I promise to you that we'll have answers regarding what just happened by our first meeting. But Hermione's words alone couldn't shake the atmosphere immediately. So Loki weighed in. If you're wondering why we did nothing immediately and were leaning towards the fact that we might have been too scared to act, I can assure you that was not the case. Nearly 13 people in the room had already pulled out their wands and primed them with spirituality to attack if things went wrong even slightly. Everyone's eyes widened, but the 13 people who had primed their wands with spirituality and their Beyonder abilities all froze at Loki's keen insight. But no one was in the mood for that today, so they let Hermione end it for today. Let us gather after dinner at the 7th floor of the castle. I have found a place for us to be able to train in without having to worry about spying eyes, and since it is inside the castle, I'm sure such a thing will never happen again. I will inform you of the meeting dates. Loki nearly groaned when he heard that Hermione knew about the Room of Requirements. His brain fired up as he looked at Luna, and it was her turn to simply shrug casually this time, which infuriated Loki a little since Luna had used his own trait card against him. What will Grandma think? I really hope 2 people can use it at once. And I hope Myone doesn't tell people how to use the room. I don't want to have my nightly research time by a bunch of kids dating in the place. Ag, yuck. Loki groaned, but everyone just walked past thinking that he was worried about having to climb up to the 7th floor after dinner with a full stomach each night since he was from Slytherin. It did give them something to laugh about though as they all left the inn, yet looking from afar one could see just how they'd instinctively gotten closer to each other to protect their backs from any sudden attacks. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.